So I'm trying a new recording method. I think the volume might be better. I've come into the workshop just for a matter of privacy. It's a beautiful day today, but I have to work. Um, this is the problem of taking on big projects these days. They're urgent and they're poorly paid, and the urgency means that any chance of having a day of rest is removed. And so I've got myself into this situation with about 50 pages to produce by Tuesday, which is probably going to be impossible, but I need to keep some coin flowing in. Coin for me is really causing a bit of stress at the moment because it's my meager supplies are dwindling fast, and I'm just not quite sure of how to turn it around. Um, the okay, so the equity release scheme is still a possibility. I've made a few inquiries, but it's not getting very far because the high street banks have a slightly weird attitude towards it, in that if you inquire at the counter, they tend to say they don't do it directly, and then they'll give you a telephone number. This has happened in 3 banks, and the telephone number, rather than being written on some of their fancy corporate headed paper or some brochure, is scribbled in pen on a scrap of paper by the teller, which is weird. I think maybe there's some law about mis-selling that they try to avoid. Now, there are companies that deal with it directly, but I feel a bit more reassured going through a high street um, estate agent or bank. But so far, all I have is 3 telephone numbers scribbled on pieces of paper, 2 of which I've probably lost already. So that's, in the pipeline. It's something I'm reluctant to do. I mean, it just doesn't feel quite right. But I can't think of another way of easing the situation unless I move. Now, if I move, I can maybe go into a flat and stay there while I empty my house and make it saleable. And then I'll have all the cash from the house and I can move to somewhere more economically sustainable. But economic sustainability with low income is always going to be a finite game. I don't know. I spend money. If I need something, I get it. I don't worry about it. But when it comes to things like motor cars, then the matter becomes a bit more serious. So I've been talking to my mechanic and local car dealership. It's a guy that I know, the car dealer. He's a great guy, a British patriot, and pretty upset about the way things are going in this country. And above all, an honest man, I think. I've dealt with him now for about 12 years, and I've been very happy with everything that has occurred in my car ownership. So he's got a used Porsche for sale at an affordable price, vaguely affordable. It's an old car with 100,000 miles on the clock, and it looks great. I just really like it. And I went to chat to him yesterday about the possibility of buying it. Of course, I don't have the coin at the moment, but I could get a loan. I can get it. And he spent all the time of our conversation trying to dissuade me. So I have to take that into account. But I'm not really entirely convinced of his arguments. He'd like to sell me a Mini Cooper, which they want about 5k for. But a Mini Cooper isn't a Porsche, and a Mini Cooper is just something that, I'm not. It's like a BMW. It's a weird concept. I don't like them very much. But of course, it probably is faster and a lot more reliable, and would be a better um, choice. But there's an aesthetic factor and a pleasure factor that's just unquantifiable. And the idea of driving that Porsche around some country lanes and hanging out is very, very enticing. I know that material possessions are, the Bible really doesn't place any value upon them, and that's quite right. But the trouble is that because we live in a world of theatre, um, I think I have to take that into account, and my possibilities, and not just dating, but just generally in the world, the level to which people will listen to what I say, also, um, or what I might share, or just generally interact with me. They're very dependent on signaling and appearance. So that's been, why I've been trying to get fit and get tanned and just start looking better generally. It's not about women, although of course that's a big driver. I wouldn't mind having some hookups from time to time, but it's more just a general thing. I'm not kind of focusing on women. I think women are probably even a bigger problem than cars these days. But of course, from a female perspective, a guy of my age driving a Porsche is different to a guy of my age driving a Mini. It's just the way that it is. There's nothing that can be done about it. They're just theatre props. And talking of props, of course, I've ditched the walking stick now generally, and I've bought myself a staff, which is pretty cool for going in the woods and climbing up, steep slopes. But generally speaking, I'm trying to walk, strengthen myself so I can walk and feel confident without taking my hiking stick all over the place, because it's just, again, it's a question of signaling certain things that I can't afford to do. One of them, I realized on Friday, I go to the butcher near my house, near about 2 miles away actually, and I walk up there and I have a good long walk, and I walk back with a great shopping bag full of meat. And I was pretty tired on Friday, so I made my way to a local park and sat on a bench in there and just chilled for a little while. It's a kind of a rough area. It's the park where I got introduced to a couple of people. The guy was an alcoholic, and his girlfriend. I made a video about it some time ago. So, even to just sit with a shopping bag on a bench in that park is signalling low value, low status, because people don't do that stuff. It kind of annoys me in a way that that's the way that things are. But the fact of the matter is, all the world is a stage. We have to represent the values that we hold dear. And the values that I hold dear can be found in this book, of course. And, I might take a different reading of it to many other people, but I do love it most dearly. There's no higher authority, of course, in the world, although this is very little understood even among Christians, I'm sorry to say. So I follow a few guys in the manosphere, and I've enjoyed their content. Although I think I'm reaching the end of my consumption because it's just repeating the same thing time after time, of course. And a lot of those guys are actually Bible believers, or some of those guys are Bible believers. And by the comments on the videos, a lot of the people that are watching them also are Bible believers, and sometimes there'll be a verse quoted from the actual Bible. Although this morning I was listening to a fellow and somebody had quoted this the verse from Proverbs 8, I think it is, but and I think the whole chapter of Proverbs 8, and I didn't double check it, but I think it would be NKJV, the New King James Bible, which is a very treacherous piece of work and should be consigned to the pyre forthwith. I don't know why people don't see that. But I think this information is gradually beginning to emerge. And many of the complaints, or my complaints, or the complaints of men and women today, of course, they're all addressed in the Bible. And we can see how much we've drifted from biblical principles. The very beginning of the Bible in Genesis 2, is it, or Genesis 3, where God addresses Adam and Eve after the fall, and he asserts, he makes the commandment, I suppose. It's not an observation, it's under his hand, that the serpent will bruise the woman's heel, and she will bruise its head. That there will be warfare, enmity between the serpent and the woman. And this is what we're seeing in the world now, and it's probably reaching its conclusion. I did check out an interesting video about birth rates across the world, and there's very few countries that are actually in positive figures. Europe is disastrous. I think the UK is 1.5. The replacement rate is 2.1, I think. So we're dwindling, and even factoring in all the foreign nationals that have come to live here who have different attitudes towards family and often larger families. So they still, taken as a whole, my country is not able to replace the population. It's just going to dwindle. And particularly Christian countries, this has been pushed, of course, because to understand the words of God in Genesis, I suppose we would have to understand who is the woman and who is the serpent. It's metaphorical, but it's also literal, of course, because the serpent is identified by Jesus Christ as the father of lies. And there are many things in the New Testament that seem to point quite directly as to which race of people might be associated with the serpent. I don't know the truth of that, and I don't want to get into any weird territory, but there is warfare going on in the world, and I think Christian nations are being systematically destroyed, and we are being mocked with even minor things, like restricted traffic zones here near where I live, where you just can't drive anywhere anymore because they've commandeered the roads, unless you're a cyclist or you're driving an electric vehicle, in which case you get a free pass in many cases. And they're destroying local businesses by doing that because people can't get to them easily. Now, people do, I think there's an overuse of motor cars on the road, generally speaking. People just use them far too much. I mean, because we've forgotten how to use our legs. There's no reason to take a car to drive, 2 miles unless you have to pick up something heavy. So I'm critical of that. But, at the same time, it's our freedoms being eroded. If a man wants to drive 2 miles, even if there's a big tailback and he hasn't understood that he can walk just as fast as drive, then let him do it. I don't care. And if I don't like the traffic fumes, I can take a quieter route. When you're walking, of course you can, and I tend to do that. We have options, and but the assault is relentless, and it's a financial assault too. People can't afford really to do much at all these days because paying rent and paying bills, they're just left with very little or nothing. So that's part of the problem. And the other part of the problem, of course, is creating this tremendous misunderstanding and rift between men and women. Because we are men, we can live our lives independently, and that's fine. But to have a woman in your life, to have a good woman in your life, is just the most wonderful thing. One or two maybe. And also for a woman, you see, without a man, they go off the rails a little bit. I find now that there's so many, I'm into the carnivore stuff, and so there's so many videos about carnivore diet, and many of them are women telling us how to eat. And I've watched quite a few of them, and some of them are good, don't get me wrong. But I've got to the stage now where if it's a woman teaching me how to do something, I just switch off. I want to listen to my brothers about this matter. And, some of these women, they just sound shrill and nagging and annoying. And the other problem, of course, is like everything, it's being used to foment disagreements among people. So you'll get the hardcore carnivores that will criticize anybody who would bite a peach. And then even the vegetarians and vegans, and people will start to virtue signal in the way that they approach the whole issue, and it's so tiresome. It's quite a difficult subject as it is, but it's maybe just human nature to follow these one-upmanship kinds of courses. That's one of the reasons I very rarely comment on anything like that, because you have to be careful what you say, the same way as in Christian forums. It's very easy to get people's backs up, because people's backs go easily up. Why should they? Let's just chill a little bit. That would be my preference. So such is the state of the world today. I think the adversary has, of course, enforced corporations across the world. A corporation is a dead body, and we are ruled by dead bodies. It's a corpse. Supposedly faceless organizations, not accountable, no personal accountability, you see, through a corporation. Not like the old style companies where there would be a managing director or a proprietor better, who would, on whose desk the buck would stop, and this would be a very wealthy man, and he might be forced to part with a significant part of his money if things don't go well. But now corporations, all they have is just so much money, and if you've got a lot of money today, then it just multiplies. One of the reasons it multiplies is because people are so willing to play the stock market and invest. And I'm critical of many people in the manosphere in this respect, because as men realize that having decent coin is going to help their quest, one of the classic ways is to resort to investment strategies. And investment strategies all rely on screwing the poorest members of society ultimately, who don't do those things and just go to the shops for a pint of milk and a loaf of bread, and see their purchasing power being eroded as these wicked corporations drive inflation throughout the world and make our money worthless. My father bought the house where I was born. My father paid £1,500 for it. It's about 3 miles from where I'm speaking, and it's I think it's a 3-bedroom house, a modest house with a garden. And the house now would probably be worth coming up to 300,000. Maybe it wouldn't get 300,000. All that money has been taken from the poorest members of society. That's how they've done it, this inflation. And that's why the people running government and stuff are on their yachts a lot of the time. I'm not against wealth as per se. I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with it. Of course, if it becomes the focus, then the Bible gives us a strong warning about it. Money is a good slave and a very harsh master. So caution is required. But I hate it when, these government positions. I remember I started dating here. I had a crack at it about 14 years ago. My first experience, and the first woman that I met up with in town, she was quite nice looking. I thought, kind of a little bit heavy maybe, and certainly quite advanced in years. And she worked for the city council in an executive position, and she was involved in ensuring compliance with guidelines between all the various council initiatives. I think she might have been in charge of that department. And this would have been somebody earning, even back then, probably 10 grand per month, £10,000. I mean, they're paid for these minor positions. They're given huge amounts of money simply as a way of driving a wedge between men and women in society. It's very often women that are able to get these positions because they have positive discrimination on their side. So, between equal candidates, a woman will have more chance of getting the job because they're trying to meet these wicked targets set by the is it the International Monetary Fund or the United Nations? They're all the same people. They're the people that control the money. When I translate for Italian companies now, most of them are falling over backwards to signal their compliance with all these things and their intention to be increasingly compliant in the future. It's not because they believe in those things. They probably think they're nonsense. But if they do that, then they have a chance of picking up government projects, of course, because then the government will be obliged to give to seek contractors that are fully compliant. They have to. It's an insurance issue. So the whole thing is just a tremendous scam, and it's benefiting these anybody who really follows corporations to some extent and will anybody who will play the game, I suppose. But I think when you see how it's stacked against you, there's no point. It's just my belief, because people who do that, they can't unplug. That's the problem. When you unplug and you see how futile it all is, then you probably can't do those jobs any longer. you become a thorn in their side because you might start to say things in the workplace that will not be acceptable. So that's it's a side of money that yeah, I just think it's been used against us, because if a woman's earning 10 grand and you're stacking supermarket shelves, she just will think that she's so far above you that you don't even exist. Um, but of course, if a guy's earning 10 grand, he won't even look at her. So it's a knife that cuts both ways, and it's just created so much upset and disturbance in the world, like the enforcement of monogamy has created so many broken families unnecessarily, and so much heartache and anguish among those who've suffered through separations and divorces, and children also growing up without fathers. Uh, the obedience to the father is such a fundamental aspect, and it doesn't happen because women, and I'm speaking generally. Of course, I know that there's going to be exceptions, and I hope and pray that there are. But as a general rule these days, women are kind of encouraged to be strong and independent. It's just almost a meme, isn't it? The strong, independent woman. And they challenge the authority of their husbands from even before the marriage is consummated. And the original marriage vows are to love, honor, and obey. And the word obey has been removed in the church, of course. It was unacceptable. This was for the woman. It was different for the man, of course. There was no requirement to obey. That's why they objected to it, really. But, two people can't obey one another. That's a philosophical nonsense. Of course, it's easy to see. You could be stuck all your life trying to go through a doorway if that were the requirement. Nobody would be able to decide who was to go first. And this is something we've seen, of course, because how long ago was it now? Maybe 20 years that it became a bit awkward. It could become awkward if you invited a lady to go through a doorway before you, as etiquette and good manners would require. So we had to be careful of it. But this is the problem, I mean, until women understand that their father has authority in the family, then the world will not be healed, because they will never then understand that their heavenly father has authority, because the authority to the woman passes through their father. If they don't respect their father, they won't respect their husband, and they will end up in a very bad place and alone, effectively, and living a very shallow and meager life. It's not their fault, kind of thing, if because of the indoctrination of schools and particularly literature and cinema and just general society, I suppose, you fall into these patterns. And then, like myself, I was raised by I think more of a traditional mother and father in that respect. I think my father still held authority in the family, but my mother was rebellious, and secretly rebellious and resentful of his stance on many things. And I think sometimes with reason. My father was quite a stern and cold man, and you can't treat a wife like that. It's an aggression. There was a war going on between them, I suppose, And my father was quite an immature sort of guy. He'd been mollycoddled by his own mother, like I had, like I was, and I ended up in a bad place, unfortunately, because I hadn't been taught how to be a man. Now, I have a book that has taught me that, and I follow it carefully, as carefully as I'm able. And it's taken a long time to turn the tide, but it's turned now. I'm not going to relinquish my authority ever again to any man, and certainly to any woman. My authority comes from God, and I can exercise it in my life, so I have to be meticulous in my actions and not involve myself in frivolity. Everything is so serious now, but that's what comes with recognizing authority. My problem, really, like a lot of men, I got married far too young. I would have been 33, but the relationship started when I was probably 29 or 28, 29, I think. So, I mean, and my wife is older than me. So I was quite unready for marriage. This is something, again, that society has completely distorted. Because men they don't really reach maturity until 35, 40. And so marrying younger is always going to lead to compromise, because you don't have the criteria to assess the situation. Now, women, of course, thankfully, and due to reproductive requirements, I guess, have been made so that they reach maturity quite young, um, mentally and physically. So a woman can, reach maturity, you could say, I would think, in her late teens, early 20s. And then she starts to, she kind of peaks at her peak fertility in her early to mid 20s, in her attractiveness, in her value. And then it gradually tails off. While for men, our value tends, if we act properly, our value will increase really until death, actually. And so this is what's happening. And of course, we want to have a relationship with women. It's important to us. It's something that gives us great comfort. It's given by God, actually. But it can be a bit tricky. God bless this morning. I hope this is audible. I'm using a new system.